As a Jew in America under Trump, I constantly have to look over my shoulder to see how people are looking at my yarmulke. When do I need to cover it up? Where Donald Trump plays a damaging, dangerous game of partisan politics with the US Israel relationship, Joe Biden knows from experience no matter who's in power, the friendship between our nations is unbreakable, unwavering, non negotiable. Joe Biden will bring a lifelong connection with the Jewish state and a career filled with advocacy for Israel's qualitative military edge and its safety, security, and peace. Where Donald Trump refuses to consistently denounce white supremacists, neo Nazis, and the alt right, Joe Biden has been an unflinching voice in calling out and acting to stop anti Semitism, xenophobia, bigotry, and prejudice of every kind. Trump has called neo Nazis very fine people, trafficked in deadly anti Semitic stereotypes, and inspired a rise of hate crimes against Jews and others. Joe Biden has spent his entire life calling anti Semitism what it is, a cancer in our society that needs to be treated and defeated with every available resource and with moral clarity. Here's the bottom line: Joe Biden is a leader of dignity and faith. He has been an unmatched friend to the Jewish people. And it's not because of some large Jewish population in Delaware. It's because these are his values, his ideals. He embodies being a mensch in public life. We're all in, and we're fighting for every single Jewish vote to win on Tuesday and build a stronger, fairer, safer, freer America for us, for our children and our grandchildren together. The more Jewish Americans who show up to vote, the better our chances. So to our entire community, I say, Yalla. Tony?
It's really hard to add anything to that wonderful laydown by Aaron. It really covers the waterfront and does it so eloquently. So I really don't have much to add. I know we want to get into maybe some specifics. I would say just putting this in a broader frame that I think uh, is important because it resonates with every American, but with this community in particular. There's a very sharp divide when it comes to the way Joe Biden looks at the world and America's role in it, and the way President Trump does. And I would just sum it up very quickly in three words: uh, leadership, cooperation, democracy. Um, and that also, I think, sums up the profound differences between President Trump and Joe Biden. And as Aaron said, the choice couldn't be clearer or the contrast starker. When it comes to leadership, whether we like it or not, the world simply doesn't organize itself. And until this administration, the United States played a lead role in doing a lot of that organizing, helping to write the rules, shape the norms, and animate the institutions that govern the way countries relate to each other. President Trump has largely abdicated that responsibility. He's put us in full retreat from our allies, from international organizations, from hard-won agreements. And here's the problem: regardless of the some of the challenges that each of these poses to us, and regardless of some of the problems that we have, whether it's with an ally, whether it's with an international organization, whether it's with an agreement, and whatever their imperfections might be, the problem is this: when we're not engaged, when we're not leading, then one of two things happens. Either some other country tries to take our place, but probably not in a way that advances our interests or values, or maybe just as bad, no one does. And then you get chaos or a vacuum that's filled by bad things before it's filled by good things. Either way, that's bad for America, and it's bad for our closest allies and partners, including Israel. So I think a Joe Biden as president would actually reassert American leadership, leading with our diplomacy, leading with our engagement, showing up again, engaging the world not as it was in 2009 or as it was in 2017 when we left office, but as it is, and as we anticipate it will become, um, and acting with a combination of humility, because many of the world's problems are not about us, even as they affect us. We can't just flip a switch to solve them, but also with confidence, the knowledge that America at its best, which it hasn't been in recent years, has a greater ability than any other country on earth to mobilize others for the greater good. The other piece of this is cooperation. Not a single one of the big challenges that we face, whether it's climate change, whether it's mass migration, whether it's technological disruption, whether it's a pandemic disease, can be met by any one country acting alone, even one as powerful as our own. And there is simply no wall high enough or wide enough to contain these threats. But at the very time, we need to find new ways to cooperate and bring other countries along. By nearly every measure, the credibility and influence of the United States under President Trump is in free fall. You've all seen, among other things, the most recent Pew global surveys that look at public opinion in country after country. And the bottom line couldn't be starker. People now have more confidence in country after country, in Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping to do the right thing regarding world affairs than they do in the President of the United States. So there's a lot of work to be done to salvage our reputation, to rebuild confidence in our leadership, to mobilize our country and our allies to meet a lot of new challenges. The president talks about putting America first. The only place I think, tragically, he's put America first is in the horrific response to COVID-19. We are 4% of the world's population and 20% of its deaths. And that bungled response has also further undermined our reputation and the influence of the United States around the world. Last piece is this. Democracy really is at the heart of everything that we need to do and everything that we are, and at least have been until recently. The strength of our democracy at home is directly tied to our ability to be a force for progress in the world and to mobilize the collective action I mentioned a minute ago. But we have a president now who's engaged in a daily assault on our own democracy, on its institutions, on its values, on its people. And that in turn has deeply tarnished our ability to lead in the world. At the same time, other democracies are a source of strength for us, especially when we're able to act together. But we've seen a democratic retreat around the world. Of the many countries ranked fully free, about 40 of them in the 80s, the 90s, the early 2000s, by organizations like Freedom House, fully half have fallen backward on various metrics of democracy. And that democratic recession is being exploited by autocracies from Russia to China that are trying to exploit and add fuel to our troubles. So we have a moment in time when democracies around the world look to the United States to be the leader of the free world, and we have a president in President Trump who embraces autocrats and disses Democrats, and basically seems to have suited up for the other side. And again, that is not good for us, but it's also not good for our closest partners around the world. So I think a Joe Biden presidency would work to renew our own democracy at home and revitalize our alliances with democracies around the world. I wanted to put this conversation in that much bigger frame because it matters. It matters to Americans and it matters to our closest partners, including Israel. But let me stop there, and I know we want to get into more specific things.
Great, thank you both. So we'll get to a couple questions, and a reminder, if folks have questions, please submit those via the Q&A option at the bottom of your screen. You'll see the Q&A button there. The first question from Jennifer Rubin at the Washington Post, and Tony, I think this will be for you. How do you imagine rejoining the JCPOA, and what conditions would you require?
Hey, Jennifer, it's great to be with you. I'm an avid reader and consumer of your column and your Twitter account too. So I really appreciate you being on. So I think with regard to the JCPOA, I think we have to put this in context, and the context is, where are we now? And where we are now is not in a good place. When President Trump walked away from the JCPOA, an agreement that on its own terms was working to block Iran's paths to producing fissile material on short order for a nuclear weapon, he promised us a better deal. And he also said that the so-called maximum pressure campaign that he would exert on Iran would make Iran less reckless, less dangerous. And unfortunately, the opposite has happened. Iran is now in the process of restarting dangerous aspects of its nuclear program that the JCPOA stopped. And we see Iran, for example, enriching uranium at higher levels, stockpiling more uranium, using more advanced centrifuges. And now we have reports that it is building an underground facility. The bottom line is the breakout time necessary for Iran to have enough fissile material to create a weapon has gone from more than 1 year under the JCPOA to, at least according to public reports, 3 months or less right now. And that puts us right back on a collision course that we were on before the JCPOA was negotiated. The other problem, of course, in his withdrawal from the nuclear deal is that it's, at least for now, isolated us from our closest allies and also encouraged Russia and China to move closer to Tehran. And that, in turn, has undermined our ability to work with the very countries we need to check Iran's destabilizing actions. So that's the nuclear side of the equation. On the pressure side, we've had this almost schizophrenic approach from President Trump, where in the first instance, Iran was able to act with impunity. For example, when it attacked Saudi oil infrastructure, when it shot down one of our drones, we didn't respond. And then, of course, we went full bore in the other direction, culminating in the removal of Qasem Soleimani, for whom no one is shedding a single tear. But taking him out was one thing. Gaming out what would be the almost expected consequences of that action is another matter, and something the administration clearly didn't do. We're now in a place where Iran's actions in Iraq, for example, in terms of its support for militia, have so increased that we are apparently in the process of closing our embassy because of the threat of rocket and missile attacks on our compound. So far from restoring deterrence, it seems to have been almost totally eliminated. If you look at the checklist, for example, that Secretary Pompeo put out when we withdrew from the agreement, he listed 12 actions Iran would have to take if we were going to get back into any kind of engagement with them on the nuclear file. Not a single one gets a check mark next to it. So that effort at maximum pressure has failed. And by the way, we're also seeing, of course, Iranian actions in Syria in terms of continuing to work to supply Hezbollah. We're seeing cyber actions of one kind or another. And finally, and I apologize for the long answer, but the context is important. We come to the arms embargo, which expired this month. There, of course, we launched an effort at the United Nations to extend it indefinitely back in September. We got a grand total of 1 of the other 14 members of the Security Council to support that effort. Everyone else said no. Russia and China didn't even have to get their veto pens out of their pockets. It was a diplomatic debacle. Then, fast forward, we invoke the sanctions snapback provisions in the JCPOA itself. There's just one catch. Those provisions in the JCPOA can, under its own terms and under the UN Security Council resolution terms, only be invoked by a participant to the agreement. And in pulling out of the Iran deal, the administration literally headlined its press release ending US participation in the JCPOA. So our allies and partners said, you can't invoke snapback, you're no longer a participant. It would have been better to stay in on those grounds too. So where does that leave us? It leaves us in a challenging place. And in the event of a Biden administration, what the vice president has said is, if Iran comes back into compliance with its obligations under the agreement, we would do the same thing. And then we would work to both lengthen and strengthen the deal, working closely with our allies and partners. And the benefit there as well is that if we are once again realigned with our allies and partners, we're in a much better place to effectively push back against Iran's other destabilizing activities and make sure that Iran is the country isolated, not the United States.
Thank you, Tony. I think the next question will also be for you. This is from Ron Campus at JTA. You welcome some aspects of the Abraham Accords, the agreements with the UAE, Bahrain, and Sudan. Would you continue to pursue the carrots, particularly the sale of F-35s to the UAE?
Yeah, thanks, Ron, very much, and good to be with you as well. A couple of things there. I think you did hear the Vice President applaud the news that the United Arab Emirates and then Bahrain were moving toward normalization with Israel. That is a good thing. He was very clear that having Arab countries recognize Israel, normalize with Israel, is a positive step that we should support and applaud. And he did, even in the heat of a campaign. Obviously, the steps with those countries also reflect a pre-existing practical reality. As you know very well, practical relations were very close. And of course, this is not exactly making peace, since there was no state of war between UAE, Bahrain on the one hand and Israel on the other. But the symbolism really matters, and some of the practical things that flow from these agreements matter as well in terms of increased people-to-people contacts, in terms of trade and business and investment, et cetera. So it's good. Um, we do, though, have concerns about what commitments may or may not have been made to the UAE with regard to the F-35. The Obama-Biden administration made sure that our most advanced fighter plane would be available to Israel, but only to Israel in the Middle East, because we wanted to make sure that Israel was able to preserve its qualitative military advantage. And we provided for the sale of some number of F-35s during our administration. I think the first one started to be delivered in 2016. And so reports that the administration has now committed to provide these planes to the UAE is something we would have to look at very, very carefully and make sure that the QME is preserved. And also, it would be very important that Congress play its normal and appropriate role in looking at any such sale. Going forward, certainly, we would encourage and work with other countries that Arab countries that would consider normalizing their relations with Israel. This is a policy and an approach, obviously, that predates this administration. Something that the Obama-Biden administration worked on. Secretary Kerry worked on this, and it's something that we would continue and encourage.
Great. Thank you, Tony. And I think we have one more for you from Michael Wagenheim from I-24 News. How would a Biden administration leverage the newly open public relationships between Israel and the Arab world to help contain Iran? How would a Biden administration assist Lebanon in stabilizing its government and neutralizing Hezbollah?
Yeah. So, Lebanon itself is a huge challenge, and I think the sort of double whammy of the sort of pre-existing economic and governance crisis plus COVID-19, and then the horrific explosions in the port area have really left the country reeling, and it desperately needs support and assistance of the right kind, but it certainly needs transparent, effective, and non-corrupt governance if it's really going to make headway, and that's something we should support. I think the support for the one institution that I think is able to help push back against Hezbollah, and that is the Lebanese Defense Forces, is something that we would also look very hard at, and what more can be done to support them in their role. But it is a significant undertaking given the challenges that the country faces. And I think with regard to other Arab countries in the region, the process of normalization, the process of recognition that's underway. Again, I would hope that in turn makes our partners and allies in Israel feel more secure. And I also hope that if we are in a position where Iran chooses to come back into compliance with its obligations under the nuclear agreement, and we do the same, that, as I suggested earlier, creates a much better environment in which we can work with other countries to, again, deal with Iran's other excesses in other areas. And that's something that a revived nuclear agreement would not only not prevent, I actually think it would facilitate, because, again, we would no longer be isolated from other countries that matter in helping curb Iran's excesses.
Great. Thank you, Tony. I think that is all the time we have for questions, but I do want to turn it back over to Aaron Kiak just to close things out here.
I appreciate it. I guess this is what happens when you're on the Zoom call with a superstar. I appreciate it, everybody, and for your readers, if they're looking to get more involved in the Jewish outreach effort, they can go to joebiden.com/Jewish, joebiden.com/Jewish. And we have phone banking, digital door knocking almost every night of the week, except for Shabbat. And really, this campaign has made an effort to reach out to the Jewish voters, especially in key swing states like Florida, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan. We've really engaged on one of the most comprehensive Jewish vote outreach efforts that I've ever been a part of. I know my colleague, Boris, has made the claim that Donald Trump might get 35% or more of the Jewish vote, but he has yet to take me up on an offer on that bet. Like I said earlier, the more Jews that vote leading up to Election Day and on Election Day, the better we're going to do.
Thanks everyone for joining. Good to be with you. Thank you.
All right, nice to see you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Aaron and Tony, and thanks to all the press for joining today. If you have any questions or follow-ups, please feel free to reach out to me. With that, we'll end things there. Thank you so much to everybody for joining. Have a good day.